a chosen one. A calling. New destination begins. Divine challenges. Only faith addresses. The birth of the new world. It was time distant, when the world was still awakening from damp touch of Eden, that Cain, the firstborn fugitive of Adam and Eve, found itself walking through fields of shadow. The earth began a new chapter, marked by growing darkness that extended over the hearts of men. With the spilled blood, Cain became the first murderer, forced to wander the earth, bearing the mark divine of his crime. Although he has built one city and generated descendants, his initial actions left one scar that would echo throughout of generations. In the heart of this desolate scenario rose the city-states, stone and ivory fortresses, but corroded by the corruption that was infiltrating in each stone, in each column. In Eldara, capital of gold and glass, the palaces reflected the glow of endless torches, but housed rulers who bathed in greed. Noah grew up among himself, ready agitated by cold winds, in a simple farm by the riverbank that rarely ran clear. Since the age of 4, your nights have been inhabited by fragmented dreams, glimpses of waters that swallowed mountains, voices distant, murmuring orders ancient, images of sea creatures with humanized eyes. Upon waking, the sheet was soaked with sweat cold, and he spent long minutes in silence, trying to decipher what your unconscious insisted on projecting. These dreams did not come as a single plot, but as pieces of a puzzle cosmic. There were sensations of vertigo when seeing the world submerged, at the same time as I saw wooden stakes raised against endless waves. On other nights, I felt inside a shell, protected by the shell, while the water insinuated itself through cracks, threatening cracks. Each fragment brought ambiguous feeling, terror and strange comfort, as if those waters belonged to your destination. Your mother and Zara used to sit by his bed when he woke up in a panic. With voice soft, warmed his forehead and blew myrrh oil on the shoulders while repeating calm chants to guide your mind. It was she who first spoke of calls and omens, but avoided imposing interpretations religious. With maternal diplomacy, said only that Noah's heart was special, that the boy might come endowed with one mission, but time would reveal its outlines. Lamech, his father, accompanied the crises of dreams with another serenity. Carpenter with calloused hands and watchful eyes, he saw in the son not a troubled prophet, but apprentice whose sensitivity pointed to gifts yet to be refined. In the foggy mornings, invited Noah to the workshop shed where logs still attached to the bark were transformed into beams and boards. There, among hammers and chisels, the boy learned to deal with the raw material of the world, find meaning in every knot of the wood, and measure imperceptible archetypes of forms. Over time, Noah gathered his fragmented dreams to the art of carpentry. Selling one log, he imagined the design of one fin, envisioned in the natural vein the skeleton of the hull. The woods that touched his skin told him stories of rain and sun, of germination and rotting. Learned to trust both in his own hands and in the messages of dreams. If one piece of wood made cracks like if it muffled moan, he abandoned that piece. But when he felt a soft vibration, almost imperceptible, knew that there germinated potential for something extraordinary. In adolescence, the dreams gained sharper details. Far from the initial terror, Noah began to recognize symbols, the shape of one diving bird, the rhyme of arcane words repeated by leather mute. In one of those visions, saw floating in a calm sea, surrounded by animals with human-like gazes, everyone turned to him in silent supplication. Upon waking, felt a flame of responsibility grow in your chest. These images gave him a weight of urgency, but also a thread of hope, as if it were capable of building something that protected life. During this period, built his first significant object, small miniature boat measuring about a cubit. Carved in cedar, The hull had a detailed interior divided into compartments and reinforced with strips of bitumen. Delivered to the father, who examined it with pride, gained a seal of approval. Lamech recorded on the Leme-1 small mark, symbol of that there began legacy. The boat, kept on a shelf, became an amulet against insecurity. Noah would take him before sleeping, landing within reach of the turbulent mind to calm it. As time went by, the childhood of gluttony and half of dreams gained more defined contours. Wood that came to life with breaths, boards that joined together of their own will, structures that rose amid the mud. These visions no longer paralyzed him of fear. Now they pointed path of creation. Your future was outlined between the whipping of the skies and the precise cut of the saw. The mission to use the wood to raise a salvation that the unconscious had revealed to him. One day the sky dawned heavy as a lead veil. Lead. Clouds scarlet were accumulating a west, tinting the horizon with sinister crimson. It was then that, without warning, the first hail black hit the thatched roof of the house of Noah. They were small stones, hard as coal but covered by a thin film red, as if the very blood of the world had frozen there. Each impact echoed inside, sounding like war drums, and soon the ground externally covered itself with one layer of small crimson pieces that melted slowly to the touch of the morning heat. In the backyard, the boy without raised his head, eyes sparkling with astonishment. "Father, what is this?" asked, picking up a red shard between his fingers. Noah's wife was already standing on the threshold, looking at the sky with tearful eyes. "It is their warning," whispered in a deep tone that silenced the crows perched on the branches nearby. Even the animals felt the change. The sheep shrank, the horse neighed in restlessness, and the cats ran inside, as if sensed fear ancestral. Lamech left the shed with the axe in hand, curious and worried. The stones red were tinkling on the ground, and he leaned down to pick them up, feeling the metallic odor rising like steam. Suddenly a gust of wind lifted dust and pushed away the orange clouds, exposing brocade of stars. However, each star seemed to pulse in tone indistinct, casting bloody shine. It was the heavens conspiring, earth and sky in leather of omens. During the morning, the hail continued, sometimes stronger, sometimes interrupted for long silences, as if the very world breathed with difficulty. The news of the phenomenon spread through the streets of Merak and Eldara, and messengers arrived at the farm of Noah, describing damage to barns and vineyards. Some vines were covered by that anomalous rain, and the grapes, when crushed, studied scarlet juice that left shadows of blood in the barrel. "The vineyard cries with us," commented Lamech, staring at the viscous liquid. In the night the following, a new signal manifested. Bird of violet plumage, very rare species, appeared exhausted on the threshold of the door, had eyes large and luminous, carved by an ancient melancholy. The wings trembled, dripping one mucilaginous sap that resembled tear. Noah, moved by tenderness, lifted carefully and took him inside the shed, improvising hay nest. The bird let out a hoarse, almost inaudible song that resonated on the wooden walls like a distant lament, distant. Naaman explained that in the neighboring kingdoms, that bird was regarded as a guide of souls, messenger between the earthly world and the divine. According to legends, only in crucial times, she ventured so close to humans and chose to land on the hand of whoever held the key to salvation. Everyone was watching the bird, its chest heaving, each feather shining like the down of a forgotten constellation. Lamech said that he had learned in old manuscripts that exotic animals were signs of transition, but no one, not even the skeptical carpenter, could deny the strangeness of that moment. For days in a row, the bird stayed in the house, feeding on grains mixed with drops of honey that Nama placed on the plate. Every day Noah felt grow inside himself echo. It was the same echo of the fragmented dreams, ancestral waves that crashed against the flesh of the world. One night around the fire, the bird raised its gaze and let out a shrill cry that made resonate raptor chorus outside. Crows and hawks overflew the farm, forming a whirlwind of wings under the pale moon. It was then that Noah realized the bird was coming to beg for refuge, but to alert to an imminent urgency. Each wing beat seemed to say, "Get ready, for the water will come." Naaman held his son by the shoulder, the look firm, and murmured, "The call will not be long in coming." Lamech, at last, left the axe in the corner and allowed himself a tense smile. "Let's listen to these signals. Something deep is announced." That early morning, the wind changed direction and brought with a cold breeze, loaded with unknown humidity. No star dared to shine in the sky. The hail red had already gone, and the exotic bird had to leave so mysteriously as it had arrived. But the trace of its signs remained in every grain of soil, in each the wood of the house. In the heart of Noah, the tension had reached its peak. It was the prelude of the divine call, the moment when dreams and reality intermingled to shape the destiny of the whole world. And in that silent dawn, the boy knew he would never sleep again as before. A few years later, in the night silence as dense as solid pitch, Noah woke up to cold that seemed lost from the eternal winter. The air of the cabin trembled. There was no wind, but the walls creaked as if they supported invisible weight. He lifted himself, and as he looked through the small crack in the window, saw the sky tearing itself in luminous cracks. Silver rays flowed down in cascades, illuminating black clouds with twisted outlines, twisted as if the firmament were alive and twisted in agony. A deep rumble passed through the valley. It was not thunder common, but ancestral roar, able to shake the soul of those who heard. Noah felt tingling in the spine as the stars disappeared, one by one, swallowed by whirlpool of light spectral. Then, beam of light exploded above your head, pouring down towards the ground, where the noise of running water found echo. He had the feeling to submerge, as if the world were about to sink into a bottomless ocean. In the midst of whirlwind shone one ethereal figure with undefined features that approached, floating towards him. The shape radiated fiery heat and one glacial cold at the same time. One voice reverberated in the depths of Noah, without words, but with meaning clear. The judgment is approaching. You will prepare refuge for all the flesh. Each syllable sounded like a hammer on the iron, engraving itself on the chest of the boy. The vision lasted only instant, but he lived it as if crossing tunnel of ages, feeling the despair of the world about to be swept away. When the light went out, Noah fell to knees on the wooden floor, his heart beat with the strength of a war drum. War, the images of the overflowing rivers, the agonizing forests, and the red hail paraded in his mind like a fatal movie. He could hardly breathe, but at the same time felt one renewing clarity, one conviction unwavering that I would have to give voice to that catastrophe announced. He got up slowly, and the silence of the cabin now seemed more urgent than the very roar. Subtle warmth blossomed in his chest, spreading through the arms as if the blood gained one new will. Noah then knew that he could not ignore the call. It was the responsibility to save not only your family, but all the creatures, those alive in flesh bodies, and those that aligned in the unconscious collective. Walk to the tool shed, the trembling hand resting on the handle of Lamech's axe. It was like touching an old promise. The inner conviction made him regain his breath, and in a surge removed the block of clay where he had drawn as a child, the small cedar boat. Now, those childish traits needed a monumental work. Each line of the project original gained new meaning, no longer a toy or amulet, but the skeleton of universal refuge. As the heart calmed down, Noah felt the presence of the divine intertwining to the fiber of his being. The mission became clear and urgent. He knew that from there on forward, each dream, each hammer blow, and each nail placed would have the purpose unique to raise the ark, door of salvation for world condemned. And at that solemn moment, the young carpenter man stopped being just the son of Lamech to assume the mantle of herald of the judgment imminent. The gentle crackling of the fire in the home of Noah barely calmed the pulsing heat in his chest. He asked for silence and gathered there around of a rustic table, his wife and the 3 children, Sem, Cam, and Japheth. The dim light of one single the lamp projected dancing shadows on the wooden walls, while each waited, with the gaze full of questions, the pronouncement that would change their lives. Noah raised carefully, searching in the breath the rhythm of the heart. In a firm voice, he told them about the apocalyptic vision, the torn clouds, the chasm of light that had descended from the heavens, of the wordless voice that commanded him to raise shelter for all flesh, described the red hail and the bird exhausted violet, omens that preceded the call. His wife, pale, squeezed her own arm as if wanted to anchor herself in concrete reality. "Did you dream all of this?" he asked. Without, the oldest, the eyes shining between the disbelief and the curiosity. "It was not dream but mission," retorted Noah, resting his hand on the shoulder of the son. "I felt the weight of the divine order and the urgency to obey it. The wife closed her eyes for a moment, fanning the light of the lamp with the back of the hand. "My love, I fear for what may happen to us, but I believe in what I saw in your eyes. The truth of these images calls us." Cam, 16 years old, fidgeted in the chair. "If this is the work of gods, why that they do not come to speak directly to us? At least we would understand better." Then Faith, the youngest, murmured, "Maybe they will speak to you first, Father. God needed to choose someone sensitive to the world." Noah smiled with the tenderness of one who loves and respects each voice. "Exactly, my son. That's why he came to me, and now to us." The words gave way to the heavy and expectant silence. Naamah, regarded by her children as a pillar of serenity, took Noah's hand and, turning to the offspring, declared, "This family unites to respond to the call. No, we will build only for ourselves, but for those who come seek shelter." He then outlined the initial plan, to take advantage of the carpentry shed as a base, to gather cedars and cypress from the orchard's neighbors, gather tools and stock resin, without furrowing the brow, worried about the reaction the neighbors. "But what if they accuse us of crazy, if risk setting fire to the shed?" Noah replied with resolute calm. "We will build in parts during the day, spreading the rumor of simple repairs. At night, we will work together to advance on the board's master tables." Kemmer already added firmly to the desire to help. "Can I go get some trusted helper, someone who believes in us? Or 2 workers who do not spread rumors?" Hafe agreed, the clear eyes reflecting the flame. "And I will sing ancient songs of protection to keep the high morale. At night the voice comforts as much as the light of the lamp." Noah's wife raised herself, placing her hands over those of the children. "That each of us takes on our part, 100 in the collection of materials, Cam in the escort of the transport, and already Faith in the hymns. I will take care of the provisions and the healing of the wounds." Upon hearing the pact, Noah felt the weight of the responsibility mixing with relief. He took a deep breath and with firm voice concluded, "Together we raise the ark. We are not just carpenter, wife and children. We are guardians of new beginning. Starting tomorrow, each blow of hammer will be a seed of salvation." Noah settled in the shed with one large board of wood clean, where I would draw the master lines of the project divine. With compass rustic and one bone ruler, drew the rectangular figure, which would be the skeleton of the ark. Each stroke was made with care, 300 cubits of length, ancestral measure passed down through generations of carpenters, exact 50 cubits wide and 30 high. In Noah's mind, these numbers were not only architectural proportions, but symbols of balance between the sky and the earth, the 3 representing the divine, the 5 harmony among the creatures, E,000 infinite of creation. The drawing occupied the entire board. In the upper corner, we'll note coordinates for the internal deck, 3 levels distinct, in overlapping floors, to accommodate animals of different sizes and the family. Made marking of the entries, 1 side ramp for the entrance of the ungulates, 1 hatch top for birds and small mammals, and 1 main door reinforced that should remain only slightly ajar until the completion of the misfortune. Each detail had a practical function and spiritual. The compartmentalizations, rendered as cells hexagonal in the scheme, they resembled honeycombs, a symbol of sweetness and cooperation between species. After completing the draft, Noah measured each cubit in the real environment. The board was placed on the dirt floor, beaten, and with pieces of rope tied to stakes defined the perimeter. He walked along the imaginary lines, feeling the exact proportion of what would be the long floating marriage floating. Was impressive. More than a field of grains would fit in that vessel. The feeling was of entering a temple dedicated to salvation, where each step resonated like a prayer. Then he went on to the selection of Madeira. With the experience inherited from Lamech, Noah gathered a small team of trusted individuals. First, they went to the nearby cypress woods nearby. The tall and straight trees, with valuable trunks, they offered lightweight and saltwater-resistant wood of the future sea. They chose uniform diameter rods, without nuts exuberant, as they could compromise the stability structural. Each log was examined, hit with small hammers to check for internal voids or grooves that indicated rot. Then, they harvested cedars from the rocky slopes. These cedars, of sweet aroma and resin abundant, they were resistant to fungi and termites, essential virtues to ensure the durability of the ark during the prolonged flood. Noah made test cuts, felt the scent, the resin, and let small fragments to dry in the sun to verify ideal density. The pinkish color of the wood gave way at dusk to zambar tones that Noah interpreted as a sign of purity and divine protection. Finally, they selected humus for the inner layer of the hull. The flexible fiber of the humus would serve as bracing, allowing the ship to withstand to strong oscillations without cracking. This wood, less common, was more difficult to varnish, but had tenacity worthy of enduring the friction of the strings and the movement of the animals. Noah ordered to make small test boards, joined by swallowtail joints and submerged in an improvised tank to observe its behavior in contact prolonged with the water. With the logs selected, the cutting and processing process began. In the shed, each log was peeled with broad-bladed axes wide blade and divided into boards by means of saws manuals. The boards then went through planers that conferred surfaces, smooth surfaces, and homogeneous thicknesses. Noah was inspecting each piece. The wood should sing a deep sound when struck, trace of ideal density. The entire carving was fitted with a chisel, and the joints were tested in dry fittings at dry before receiving bronze nails and wooden pins. The symbolisms the woods intertwined: cypress to float, cedar to resist, and omo to flex. This triptych would guarantee the ark the support, mechanical and spiritual, necessary. Noah was recording each batch of boards on yellowed parchments, recording the origin and the characteristics of each type of wood. Wrote also short sentences in the outlines, invoking blessings for the construction to remain intact until the end of the flood. And so, between drawings' precise and meticulous selection of sacred woods, the ark took shape not only as a project of salvation, but as a living work, conceived to embrace all beings. Each mark in drawing and each chosen log reinforced the family conviction that the mission would transcend simple carpentry. It was the greatest act of faith ever undertaken by humanity. When the campaign began to raise the first master beams, Noah and 100 left at dawn along the roads in muddy roads, carrying scrolls with schemes of the ark and promises of payment generous. 100 offered to the peasants copper coins and barrels of grain for workday. However, many refused to abandon their crops to raise wooden monster. For these, the greatest fear was not the divine judgment, but the mocking trot of the neighbors. Are they going to build the ship of the end of the world? They were asking, laughing. With few workers, the progress was slow, and the line in front of the shed seemed to decrease every afternoon. Noticing the scarcity, Noah authorized what he called forced recruitment. Community liaison officers brought in a list signed by the local leaders, workers whose land rent was overdue or who owed tithes to the city. They were men exhausted, used to begging for mercy in squares and to bowing before warlords. Lamech guaranteed them shelter and food in exchange for hours of labor, but made it clear that the refusal would imply the confiscation of their villages. It was a moral dilemma: use the pain of others to raise the shelter of all. Even so, each additional arm modulated the file and the hammer as instruments of salvation, not of punishment. So, the rumor of recruitment by force crossed the walls of Eldara and Marak. Children pointed their fingers, adults whispered in the taverns, and priests whispered curses to exorcise the madness of Noah. In the squares, minstrels composed songs that mocked the carpenter visionary, painting the ark like an old can floating in a muddy sea. Came to attach caricatures the wooden posts, faces of Noah with big noses and crazed eyes, surrounded by animals that were laughing. This mockery public installed hostile atmosphere. Whoever accepted work ran the risk of being called a traitor. Weeks later, the clash became more serious. At midnight, lanterns arose silently in the shed. Saws and axes were found crushed or thrown in a well. Cedar logs covered by lichens poisoned released toxic vapors when cut. Tools disappeared mysteriously, reappearing broken or nailed into a trunk without use. In 4 nights, 2 main beams fell due to sabotage of cables cut and are crooked on the ground. On the walls, graffiti warned the carpenter, "Go back to your house, or you will pay with blood." Despite the threats, Noah gathered the family to the corner of shed the next morning. 100. Kami Jaffe cleaned the boards and collected the tools destroyed. Namar prepared herbs to heal the cuts of workers. Noah, with a firm voice, declared that each act of sabotage reinforced the urgency of the project. Ordered night watch in shifts, with torches and ropes stretched between posts, and invited friendly priests to bless the place. The reward has increased for those who reported acts of vandalism, and little by little some citizens, embarrassed for the turmoil, they began to exchange the ironic laughter for respect cautious. In a few days, the workforce doubled. Ancient critics called themselves to consciousness upon seeing the workers carving the beams with sweat and hope. In the warehouse, the rhythm accelerated. Jaffe's song cradled the work, and each nail driven seemed to silence little of the scorn exterior. The contradiction between the hatred of the skeptics and the effort of the believers turned the space into a furnace of faith. The ark grew as an argument that it would be possible to build salvation even when breaths of evil roamed the world. The shed dawned wrapped in humid fog when the first trunks were waiting upright, supported on stone blocks. Noah gathered the team before the crowing of the rooster. Today they would raise the master beams, the skeleton that would give definitive shape to the ark. With thick hemp ropes and wooden pulleys tied carefully each log of cedar to the system of improvised levers. Men and women lined up along the edges, calloused hands ready to pull at the master's signal master. At the first impulse, the logs rolled over wooden rollers, screwed to the ground, gaining controlled speed. When the base of the hull rose, chant change sung by Hafe marked the beat. Hergete, refuge of life. Each string creaked under the colossal weight, and distant lightning announced heavy clouds. In a sudden jolt, the main rope threatened to snap. He helped, cut the old knot and replaced it by loop reinforced while Cam was fastening the auxiliary cable. Noah's heart beat strong. A landslide at that height would have been fatal. After hours of rhythmic effort, 3 main beams were already rising, outlining imposing arch that resembled the ribs of a giant. Each new beam placed, the hull gained outlines. Each hammer blow, the bronze nails produced an echo that resonated in the valley, as if the own earth witnesses the birth of something sacred. In the afternoon, they began the sealing with bitumen. Lamech lit the furnace under large cauldrons where it melted the thick black compound. The acrid smell rose in clouds of smoke, causing cough and tears in the workers. Using iron spatulas and rustic brushes, they spread the bitumen over the joints of the boards. Each groove, each crack, should receive the coating, preventing the entry of water. Noah climbed on internal scaffolding to inspect from top, leaning over the void with the confidence of a tightrope walker. When the first bucket of hot tar ran from where it shouldn't have, causing a syrup of smoke and ashes, the team held their breath. Cam quickly positioned repique boards to contain the flow, while Sen raised the vent to dissipate the excess of smoke. In the love outside poured water in small portions, controlling the embers that fed the furnaces. The day turned to twilight, and the last light of the sun reflected in the viscous shine that dripped down the keel. One light rain began to fall without warning. Drops crackled on the newly varnished hull, testing it in real time. At the meeting point of 3 boards appeared one tiny crack. Water wire licked the interior wood. Noah signaled for silence, ran inside, and armed with cold tar and fine sawdust sealed that gap. The noise, the dripping stopped, and the collective sigh broke the silence. Under the flickering lamp of the torches, the team ended the journey. The hull, now robust and waterproof, shone in a deep shade of ebony. Each damask of bitumen told one story of tension, skill, and faith. Noah touched the wood, feeling the vibrations of the construction whisper safely. Even exhausted, no one complained. They knew that there they had created not only shelter physical, but a sanctuary of hope capable of facing the imminent waters. In the heavy silence of the shed, Noah felt the environment vibrate, as if the world held its breath. The freshly polished wood under your knees seemed to warm up, projecting dancing shadows on the walls. So, without thunder or winds carrying the signal, one voice, deep and clear, reverberated in his innermost. God communicated to Noah that only the creatures would be led to salvation inside the ark. In image vivid, Noah heard the command to raise the refuge for each species of animal, and that men would not cross that threshold when the waters came. Upon receiving this instruction, the carpenter remained for a moment stunned, assimilating the weight and the uniqueness of the command divine. Rising with the heart pulsating with purpose, he felt a breeze laden with jet and sandalwood traverse the darkness, as if the air were a messenger of the Creator. Without calling, Noah's family gathered around him, but there it was not necessary one around him, but there one was not necessary word whatsoever. Understanding and obedience flowed from their gazes. Noah, with the restrained gesture, indicated that they should go to the deck, and his wife and children watched in silence the miracle that was unfolding. Outside, the semi-open gates creaked to the rhythm of invisible invitation. The first creatures to respond were the herds of being videos and zebras that advanced in orderly rows, firm steps on the muddy ground, as if followed by moonlight strings. Each couple bowed their neck in a greeting silent, recognizing the ark as sanctuary. Then hippos and rhinoceroses of heavy hooves and powerful breathing stepped onto the stage with the confidence of one who knows its place in the creation. Then came the felines. Golden-maned lions and striped tigers mock-moved in precise pairs, going around the beams before entering the hull. No roar broke the sacred silence. It was enough observe the reverence that enveloped each paw landing on the floor, witness of the only refuge for all the flesh. Next, bears of different species slid to their niches, closing the wing of the large mammals with the contained bustle. Inside the ark, the boards previously marked came to life. The central spaces intended for large herbivores filled up of hay and fresh herbs, while the compartment's sides, reinforced with bronze grates, accommodated the carnivores. The small mammals found shelter in suspended baskets, giving wings to curiosity. Rodents and rabbits peeked from the cracks, hopping without hurry. On the upper floor, the birds completed the scene. Flocks of doves, white, imposing eagles and multicolored macaws perched on the perches, filling the space with the soft sound of wing beats. When the last pair of birds settled, one unusual calm enveloped the place. Noah walked through the internal walkways, touching the wood that the Creator had entrusted to him. In each brush of fingers, he felt pulse the life of those he had come to welcome. The divine voice did not need to repeat itself. The purpose was fulfilled. Outside, the wind stopped and the stars reappeared in the clear sky. The ark, sealed by the breath of the Judge of World, became living organism, ready to face the waters and preserve the breath of creation, driven by faith and obedience of a man who had heard the divine warning. The morning crowing of the roosters barely sounded when Noah went up to the deck with the family, with torches in hand to inspect every detail before the final closure. On the sides of the hull, the door bolts were checked one to one. Semos and Jaffe were pushing the wooden slats, making sure that the hinges squeaked softly ideal, without gaps that would allow let in the moisture of the eminent waters. Cam, for his part, applied strips of leather varnished around the frames, ensuring extra sealing. With each fitting that snapped into place felt the weight of purpose. The ark would soon be sealed, and nothing nor anyone else could cross its threshold. Inside, Nama walked through the corridors with wicker baskets and linen bags, organizing the stock of provisions. On improvised shelves, boards suspended by hemp ropes, rested barley bags, wheat and oats, meddled with perfect grain perfect. Below, large ceramic amphorae held water from the pure springs, filtered with charcoal and aromatic herbs to prevent mold. Each amphora displayed wax seal, marked with the initial of each type of provision, to facilitate counting and restocking during the trip. In the central divisions, where the herbivores were accommodated, Noah and the sons were depositing dry leaves of alfalfa and freshly cut hay wrapped in tarps to protect them from moisture. Meanwhile, bunches of carrots and roots stored in perforated baskets hanging from the ceiling, accessible but far from the muddy ground. Cam was inspecting each cut, removing yellowed leaves and storing sunflower and pumpkin seeds in the clay jars, ready to sow the land after the crossing. In the compartment of the predators, Lamech had provided skins of raw sheep and game cuts, salty, stored in treated wooden boxes with resin. The pieces were hung on fine rod lines, thin, keeping distance from the ground for them to dry in time certain. Along with these meats, panels of herbs, medicinal mint, basil and thyme were tied in bundles to scent the environment and assist the digestion of the more demanding animals demanding. On the upper terrace, the bird space, Nama arranged bags of various grains, corn, barley and millet, as well as mixtures of fruits, dried dates and figs to sustain the energy of the contained flights. In small ceramic pots, honey from local hives offered natural sugar reserve, capable of maintaining the vitality of the small creatures. With everything stocked, Noah advanced to the doors, invited the family for the final ritual, the placement of the forged copper bolts, imported from Eldara to seal the wood. While 100 and Jaffe were fitting the first framing, Kem turned the iron keys that activated inside the movable locks, and Nama sprinkled holy water around, murmuring prayers of protection. When the last latch was secured to the slat, The metallic echo reverberated like a salvation bell. Far from there, the clouds grew dense and the first band of light rain began to fall. Noah raised his gaze, feeling the hull resonate under the first drops. He then sighed between relief and solemnity, aware that the ark was ready. The salvation of the animals and the fulfillment of divine warning depended on that hermetically sealed shelter sealed. Now, there was only left to wait for the waters to come confirm what the faith of man had raised. The sky, once leaden and silent, became thick mantle of heavy clouds. Noah, from the internal deck, felt the air throb with a tension almost electric. The animals, accustomed to the routine, they raised their ears and stared at the outside, as if they sensed the harbinger of chaos. The torches flickered, casting shadows that danced on the central beams. It was then that the first drops, soft as fingers hesitant, they touched the wooden roof, echoing softly in the silence concentrated of the boat prepared for the judgment. In minutes, the delicate drumming evolved into one sound current. Thick drops hammered the boards with force increasing, releasing small flakes of dust and resin. The sharp crack of one drop touching in tar hot sounded like domestic thunder, while the acrid smell of damp wood mingled to the strong odor of freshly applied tar. Noé felt his heart race. Those drops were not common rain, but the announced flood that would sweep the world. With the increase in intensity, the winds came into play. Howling gusts crashed against the sides of the hull, making the creaking as if it were writhing in pain of pain. The hemp ropes, staked between mast and mast, whistled when being targeted by the gale. In the small shed converted into a shelter, 100 and Cam fixed their gazes and widened against Punch to stabilize the doors, while Jaffe sang improvised songs to keep the spirits up, each verse hitting in the humid air like shield against the impending panic. The hull, initially solid, began to emit deep cracks. The main beams, support of the whole structure, trembled under the combined impact of wind and water. At each junction, the bronze of the nails crackled, and fine cracks in the wood, before almost imperceptible, became visible trails of dark shadow. Noah walked the central walkway wearing thick leather boots, touching the surfaces to assess vibrations. With each step, felt the trembling weight of the construction, wooden organism that breathed rain. Inside the compartments, the animals reacted in different ways. The servants lined up next to the grates, attentive to the muffled noise of the boards. The felines, used to hunting in silence, coiled in their niches, eyes shining in the dark. Rodents and rabbits in suspended baskets jumped in small scares, spreading sawdust on the deck. The birds, in a choir anxious, they flapped their wings in unison, filling the space with soft rumbling gentle that seemed to imitate the roar of the storms. Noah ordered reinforcement of the doors internal, using cedar wood bars to create new locks. Namar ran between the modules, distributing leather bags with salt water, improvised relief valves to drain small leaks. 100 and Cam extended thick tarps under the cracks, collecting the dripping incessant in carved wooden gutters, leading the water to ceramic buckets that creaked under the weight of the liquid. Meanwhile, the family adjusted the emergency routine. Emergency. Oil lanterns hanging on hooks were realigned to avoid being extinguished by the swirling wind. At each interruption in the rain, Noah briefly opened one hatch to check the level of external water, measuring the advance of the flood. The sounds of the collapsing world, muffled by the wooden carcass, arrived like a whisper threatening. The growing roar of rivers breaking through dams, the distant roar of walls collapsing. When the rain finally gave a momentary respite, the hungry stomachs of the herbivores demanded attention immediate. That interlude of calm allowed the distribution of hay and roots, while Noah inspected each screw and reinforcement, aware that it would be enough more storm to test the ark to the limit. And so, between the rhythmic hammering of the rain and the symphonic cracks of the wood, the true test of endurance began. Learning to live with the crisis that would settle and trust that the wooden refuge would withstand the coming waters. When the rain returned, did not come in drops gentle but in a curtain of water that obscured the horizon. Soon the first waves rose up in the distance, liquid mountains that advanced like walls alive. The ark, now completely sealed, felt the shock of the first impact. The hull trembled, the planks reverberated under the impact, and each bronze nail sounded like a hammer on a colossal drum. The waves, driven by very strong winds, grew in fury and height. They were colossi of murky water, carrying debris from entire cities, uprooted trees and pieces of walls that floated like skeletons of empires. The sound was deafening, continuous roar, half thunder, half roar of a sea beast. The waves crashed against the hull with giant stroke of strength, and the foam flew through the arches, the beams like dirty snow, covering him deck external on a slippery crust. Each swell projected the ship upwards, causing it to tilt more than 30 cubits, the pulp jumping over the void before dive again with violence. Noah, steady on the improvised helm, recalibrated the steering with the help of cables reinforced, but recognized that there was no right course when the entire sea became a whirlpool without a center. In the midst of the storm, lightning cut through the sky in shards of light white, fleetingly revealing the flooded vastness. Where peaks and plains once emerged, now it stretched endless lake under clouds of storm. Inside, the panic was contained by the firm rope of emergency protocols. Hundred and Cam were fighting against the swing, tying improvised handrails and holding lit lanterns to guide the workers. The wood creaked with deep cracks, inevitable bends, as if the hull were breathing in the midst of a crisis. The nut that held the keel cracked in a jolt, and some hammers rolled across the floor, reinforcing the atmosphere of tension. Each jolt was accompanied by the thud of the animals, muffled roars, anguished roars, and the frantic beating of wings caged. The shelves of the niches creaked under the weight of the felines that sought stability, and the herbivores were crowding in the corners, confusing the inner arch in a tangle of legs and horns. The smell of wet wood mixed with the strong odor of the panicked animals. In the central warehouse, where the stock of provisions, water barrels crashed against each others, spreading liquid and broken seeds on the ground. With each more violent swing, one thread of hope trembled in the voices. Ancient songs that Faith already sang, to remember that even in chaos, Faith could keep the inner lighthouse lit. Outside, the ship seemed swallowed by the dark grooves of the waves. The side was bending, arching like the belly of a leviathan, before being tightened by foam cracks in its black tar seams. The wooden fuse which held the covering gave way for a moment, and cold splashes entered through a crack, licking the skin of the workers. Nama, equipped with one wind-resistant oil lamp wind, led repair teams immediate. They applied quick sealant in leather bags full of resin, blocking the leak as emergency bandage. When the rain decreased for brief moments and the sea made one pause, Noah climbed to the highest point of the deck. With his head wrapped in a soaked hood, raised his arms and murmured a prayer of protection. The voice almost got lost in the howling of the wind, but it was enough to gather the group around him. He envisioned for a second the land submerging under the waters, the fury that swept plains and forgetfulness of humanity, and I knew that the Ark would not withstand due to human merit, but by the alliance forged between faith and work. Returned to the helm and tilted the hull against the following waves, accepting the balance as part of the destiny. The structure groaned but did not break. Each baluster secured, each nail intact, was a witness that that wooden sanctuary would withstand the fury of the flood. As the day brightened amidst clouds black, the Ark continued, floating like an island of salvation over the vast sea of destruction, resisting to each oscillation, to the judgment that echoed in the submerged world. After days of storm, grey silence settled on the deck. Noah, exhausted, opened his eyes to the first light of dawn, filtered by the cracks of the hull. The routine on board would need to be rebuilt to ensure survival of all humans and animals. As dawn broke, the air smoothed out in mists and the family gathered in the hallway central. Each took on their task without taking care to distribute the hay to the large herbivores. With shells of wood, he placed the shavings, golden alfalfa and sparse branches of freshly cut trees while watching the cotton swab of beaks lowering to eat. Cam, cautious, entered the compartments of the predators with long wooden forks, carrying portions of salted meat and cured hunting rods, always avoiding the sharp eyes of tigers and lions that followed him in hungry silence. Nama, with tireless patience, traveled the nurseries suspended of small mammals and birds, handled carefully the wicker baskets where rabbits and rodents were lined up, removing wet straw and replacing them with straw fresh. In clay pots offered mixtures of grains, millet, barley, and a little honey to parakeets and parrots that pecked the seeds in a reassuring echo. Jaffe was chanting prayers for the creatures, and its song calmed the restless birds, preventing them from spreading seeds across the wet deck. While Noah watched the inside of the hull, inspected each joint, each sealed crack still with putty, taking advantage of the calm to reinforce the joints with strips of leather varnished. Ordered the password to take the bucket to drain the water that was still dripping from the board's upper, and guided Cam to sharpen tools, preparing the boat both for urgent repairs for daily work. Despite the initial order, the coexistence became tense. Right after the rationed barley coffee, large herbivore, perhaps haunted by the memories of the pasture, began to push the slats of the partition, wanting space beyond what the hull allowed. The wooden boat shone under the light the torches, and the sound of hooves against the wood generated panic in the felines adjacent, who growled in warning. Cam and 100 ran to calm the herd, building one improvised fence that reinforced the partition, but the tension echoed in the air. In the improvised cafeteria the food supply crisis is proved threatening. The rigorous grain count indicated that the barley stock would last only another 7 days for the family and the birds, not counting what they were reserving for the rodents. One discussion broke out between Noah and Cam, the young impressed by rationing even more, while the father feared that the scarcity would break the morale of the children and the workers, who now and then arrived in search of shelter. The table trembled under the weight of pots of empty clay, and harsh words flew. "We cannot die of hunger while others live," accused Cam, and Noah replied, "The feed that nourishes the life, but a hope sustains the spirit." That night, when the storm rumbled in the distance, already Faith heard the youngest son sobbing in secret. "And if God has abandoned us here inside," the words echoed like knives. Nama wrapped the boy in maternal arms, whispering ancient stories of alliance and mercy. It was then that Noah, gathering what remained of faith, struck the fist on the table and spoke with choked voice. "There are still dormant seeds that will sprout when the earth will rise again. As long as there is air in this shell, there will be life and promise." The dawn brought a breath of tranquility. The tide, lighter, shook the ark in a rhythmic and gentle sway. In the internal courtyard, herbivores resumed the calm, chewing calm of the hay. Felines napped in isolated cubicles, and the birds spread their wings in vigil silent. The family returned to work with renewed purpose: repair the deteriorations of the hull, divide carefully the rations, and calm the faith that trembled every morning. In that tense coexistence, learned between bread crises and confrontations of spirit, each gesture of care reinforced the family bond. The ark remained as a refuge of life, not only of the animals that occupied its holds, but of the men who, in taking care of others, re-encountered themselves and the promise of a world reborn. The continuous roar of the rain finally fell silent. On the deck, the silence revealed soft creaks of the soaked wood, expanding with relief. Without opening one hatch and looking outside, noticed the late drops sliding on the boards. Cam and Jaffe gathered buckets to drain the accumulation inside the hull, while Naaman left the dull windows open, allowing the cold and clean breeze sweep away the strong odor of bitumen. The calm suspended the tension of days, announcing that the worst was already over. The water mirror began to lower, revealing outlines shaded earth. First, isolated rock emerged. Then, peaks cut the horizon, like crowns of hope. Noah measured the apparent distance with the improvised astrolabe. Improvised. Zen wrote down coordinates on parchment damp. The pale glow of the sun tinged amber the mountain crests, and the birds landed on rock trunks covered in moss. The family gathered on the deck, let the relief warm the face, and shared brief song of gratitude. Trusting in the divine promise, Noah went up to the top of the main deck with one white dove on the arm. He remembered the voice that had spoken to him to look for signs of land firm. Let the bird go to the gentle wind and followed it with her gaze. She took flight in circles, disappearing for moments in the mist that still hovered over the waters. The expectation tightened everyone's chest. After a long, silent flight, the dove returned, but returned to land with nothing in its beak. Noah tried again. More one dove and then another, each launch followed by low prayers. When she released the third, the expected miracle emerged. The bird returned to the deck, landed next to Noah and dropped olive branch, with leaves green intact. A measured uproar of joy ran through the hull. The signal was clear. The land did not only will reappear, but offered life. Noah kept the branch as a relic of the world to be born. When collecting the doves and the sacred branch, the family felt that the chapter of the flood had ended. The retreat of the waters not only sporadically exposed soil firm, but one promise of renewal. With the olive branch in hand, Noah prepared for the final phase, to definitively open the doors of the ark and step the land that will rise beneath your feet. The rising sun spread shades golden on the deck when Noah approached of the heavy wooden door, studded with bronze and sealed by multiple locks. The family gathered in reverent silence. 100 held the lamp to illuminate the mechanism. Ken was applying oil to the hinges. Shafé knelt in prayer. At the exact moment, Noah turned the iron lever iron, and the increasing creak sounded like sigh of freedom. Drip still dripped salty water through the opening that opened, but soon the light invaded the interior and the smell of damp earth filled the air. As the end of the threshold was moving away, a stream of water flowed down the ramp, forming small currents that reflected the sky in movement. The ark trembled in a gentle thud, adjusting to the new balance between hull and ground. From the threshold to where the lamp illuminated, there were small natural steps of mud and leaves rotten, witnesses of a world that was reborn under the tide that was receding. Noah was the first to descend. Cautiously, rested his hand on the warm wood of the railing, feeling the cold of the dew on the face. The water reached up to the ankle, but below it sprouted green shoots and one fertile soil, soft as the freshly damp velvet. Upon placing the firm foot on the ground, soft noise of mud yielding, and exhaled a sigh so deep that seemed to import the air of a new world. Then came Naamah, in a protective gesture, extending the arm to the husband. When her feet stepped on the light mud, emotion sob escaped from his lips, mixing relief and gratitude. The children walked hand in hand, leaving irregular footprints that soon filled with small streams formed by the flow of water. Without stopping to touch the sprout of grass emerging, Bed Niehaus picked one soft leaf and kept it in the chest like a talisman. Already, Faye raised her arms, opening her face to the clear sky, letting the hymn rise in trembling voices. Behind them, the animals moved forward in line. The deer, cautious, stepped on the new grass, shaking their body like ashamed of being the first to reunite with earth. The rhinoceroses and hippopotamuses paved the way, carving paths in the still, soft ground. Predators, now free from the niches, advanced to the edges of the ramp, sniffing the renewed environment. The birds descended in gentle flocks, perched on the emerging branches and releasing songs that mixed strangeness and joy. With each step, the scenery revealed itself more lush. Ferns, shoots, and small wildflowers appeared in multicolored patches. Moss-covered stones formed mosaics, soft. In the distance, clear streams shimmered in newly opened beds, carrying clear water to rebuilt valleys. At the top, mountains cutting into serene lines, crowning the horizon with peaks still seen before of the flood. The family stayed together, in a circle, looking at that lush carpet that the waters had mirrored and then released. Naamah took from her pocket a handful of seeds saved for the exact moment. He handed them over a 100, which opened them slowly, letting them touch the ground. "May life sprout again," she murmured. Noah fixed his gaze on the future, and with a firm voice declared that this be the first step of one new alliance between man and the earth and every creature that walks here today. In that renewed soil, each footprint marked not only the wooden refuge landing, but the restart of everything that the ark represented: salvation, hope, and the sacred commitment to care for the world that was reborn. Shortly after the sun warms the horizon beyond the risen peaks, Noah gathered the family on top of one small hill near the ark. With large flat stones, flat basalt, stacked the altar in a stepped format. 3 stone steps symbolizing sky, man, and earth. Sam brought smaller blocks for the step lower. Cam adjusted the faces of the slabs with chisels inherited from Lamech. Jaffe carried cedar twigs and branches of olive tree for the incense. At the base, they melted bitumen and resin for seals that would protect the sacred doidade and the occasional rain. In the center of the altar, Noah drove in one beam of cypress wood, remembrance of the hull that saved him. To around, arranged ceramic pots with honey, olive oil, and cereals, offerings of gratitude for the refuge provided. Naamah brought perfumed oil and wildflowers, poppies and daisies to decorate the corners of the altar. Each gesture was accompanied by chants ancient, sung by Jaffe, that evoked the covenant first between God and creation. When the altar was ready, the family moved away in a circle. Noah, raising his hands, pronounced the blessing, gave thanks for the protection granted, for the ark raised and for the lives preserved. He offered first a lamb, sacrifice of pure meat, deposited on a slab, followed by honey and cereals that the fire consumes without consuming the essence. Under the gentle wind, the incense flames rose in silver spirals, and the smoke drew in the air symbols of peace and renewal. But the last exodus of smoke has dissipated. Clouds covered the valley, and soft glow transformed the sky. Multicolored arch emerged in the sky, arching as a bridge between the altar and the mountains distant. As color stripes, red, vibrant, cozy orange, radiant yellow, moist green, deep blue, delicate indigo, and mystical violet, dyed the clouds with the divine promise. The covenant of God will manifest in light, converting fear into certainty of eternal covenant, without diverting his gaze to the brothers, whose faces reflected contained emotions, astonishment, and relief mixed. Cam extended his hand to touch the stone of the altar, as if he wanted to engrave there the image of the arch. Jaffe, in silence, raised the hymn of gratitude, whose melody accompanied each shade of the rainbow. Noah, standing, felt the weight of the mission to become renewed spirit. The alliance was not a promise of impunity, but sacred covenant of preservation and mutual care. Under the colorful sign, family and animals observed in reverence. Even the most cautious servants approached the altar, sniffing the air scented by the burnt resin. The birds, in low flight, landed on the stones as living witnesses of the covenant, and on that morning of sacred light, the world to be born was sealed in union irrevocable between the Creator, man, and all the creation. With the land renewed still damp under his fingers, Noah designated 100 to prepare the sowing bed. Using rustic wooden plows reinforced with bronze, the young man stirred the soil fertile, opening aligned furrows under the soft light of the dawn. Cam received the long-awaited handful of seeds: wheat, barley, lentil, and grape seeds. In each furrow, I deposited 3 grains, symbolizing trinomial of fertile consumption and return to the land. Naamah gathered the children from the emerging settlement, teaching them to sow the seeds carefully, covering them with a fine layer of loose soil. Around the field, the family marked small elevations for the cultivation of vegetables, carrots, turnips, and onions, with packets of aromatic herbs and seedlings of olive trees already germinated in clay pots, delineated primitive orchard. Which day would be a source of oil and comforting shade. It was the sowing of a new cycle. Each handful of soil triggered the clock of the life, and hope sprouted at the same time that the grains. While the plants were rooted in the soil, the time has come to expand horizons. Noah and Cam gathered families of workers, and some of the employees converted into crew members, now wanting to resume life on solid ground. They carried sticks and blankets. They bagged provisions in hides and dismissed goats and sheep for pasture beds. The original core, Noah, Naamah, 100, Shem, and Japheth, took the lead, guiding the others through dry mud trails dotted by newly formed streams. Each step was an act of courage. The slopes covered with green sprouts emerged as a backdrop of a promising land, and the voices of the group sang prayers for the soil to remain generous. Pack animals, donkeys, and cattle followed behind, carrying tools, seeds, and symbolic offerings placed in pots of ceramics. The children were running, fascinated by the profusion of life that was sprouting, while the elders cleared glades, already surveying locations to erect new housing and irrigation tanks. The migration was not a long journey, but the first step of communities reconstructed. Each family chose a piece of land, next to streams, to install shelter of stones and clay. The children planted new seeds along the banks, eager to taste the fruits of effort. On the horizon, the resurrected mountains accompanied the procession as silent guardians. Noah, in happy silence, observed the restart. The sowing transformed into a settlement. The ark is now an instrument of transition to the world renewed. And so, between the tinkling of peace and work calls, humanity started over. The loyalty to the divine alliance translated in care for the earth and its creatures. Each hand that joined the farm was witness to the promise of the rainbow. The judgment has passed, and the creation would flourish under the responsibility of man who learned that salvation is made so life.